The planet Virex had always been peaceful, a small but thriving world nestled in a quiet corner of the galaxy. The Virexians, a species with delicate features and kind hearts, had lived in harmony with their planet for millennia. Their technology was advanced but peaceful, focused on enhancing life rather than conquering. They had long been known as a quiet, humble race who had little interest in the greater struggles of the galaxy. But that peaceful existence came to an abrupt end when the Nakar Dominion arrived. The Nakar Dominion was a powerful empire that spanned across dozens of star systems. Their ships were vast, their weapons destructive, and their culture ruthless. The Nakarians believed in strength above all else, viewing weaker civilizations as nothing more than obstacles to be crushed. Virex, with its slow, methodical way of life, seemed an easy target. At first, the Virexians had tried to resist, using their advanced but peaceful technology in an attempt to defend their world. However, they quickly realized they were outmatched. The Nakarians destroyed their cities with ease, reducing once bustling metropolises to smoldering ruins. The Virexians had no choice but to fall back, retreating into the mountains, hoping to hide and regroup. The Nakarians, uninterested in the survivors, began to strip the planet of its resources, turning Virex into a colony for their empire. It wasn't long before the Virexians understood that their people, their culture, and their way of life were in grave danger of being completely wiped out. In their desperation, the Virexian leaders made a decision that would change the course of their fate. They sent out a distress signal, a cry for help, across every known communication channel, hoping against hope that someone, anyone, would answer. Their message was clear. Virex is under attack by the Nakar Dominion. We beg for assistance. Our people are being destroyed. We cannot survive alone. The Virexians had no allies they could call on. The galaxy, for the most part, had been indifferent to their plight. Still, they hoped. They hoped that some civilization, somewhere, would hear their call. Perhaps a distant power, a race with the strength to challenge the Nakarians, might come to their aid. The message was broadcast through every known frequency. For a while, the Virexians waited in silence, each passing moment filled with fear and uncertainty. Days turned into weeks and the Nakarian attacks grew worse. Whole villages were burned to the ground. The planet's once lush forests were destroyed for the resources hidden beneath the soil. The Nakarians had no mercy. As the Virexian Council watched helplessly, they began to fear the worst. Would the galaxy let them fall without a fight? Was there truly no one left to help? Then, as their hope began to fade, something unexpected happened. A response. A single cold voice came through the speakers, cutting through the static of the distress signal. At first, the Virexians believed it was another Nakar transmission, taunting them as they had done countless times before. But this voice was different. It was calm, unshaken, and chilling in its simplicity. "I am listening," the voice said. There was a pause, and then the words came again. "Help is coming." The Virexian leaders froze. It wasn't a message of mockery, nor was it a cruel response from the Nakarians. The voice did not belong to any of the known alien species of the galaxy. This was something else, something new. Who was this? What civilization had heard their cry and was offering help? The Virexian Council could only stare at each other in disbelief. They weren't sure if they should feel hope or suspicion. Still, they clung to the sliver of hope the mysterious voice had given them. A part of them wanted to believe. After all, what choice did they have? The Nakarians, however, paid no attention to the strange transmission. They had already conquered Virex and were in the process of enslaving the survivors. To them, it was just another sign of weakness from a desperate species. They didn't know it yet, but they were about to make a terrible mistake. Days passed and the Virexian people held their breath. The Nakarians, unaware of the impending arrival of a new power, continued their assault. But then, something happened that they could never have predicted. It started with a ripple in the sky, something that bent the stars themselves as though space itself was being stretched. The Nakarians, confused and unaware, had no time to react before the source of the disturbance revealed itself. A ship. A colossal, incomprehensibly large ship, unlike anything the Nakarians had ever seen. It appeared out of nowhere, like a phantom, materializing from the depths of space. The very fabric of reality seemed to warp around it as it entered the atmosphere. It was as if the ship had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The Nakarian fleet was caught off guard, scrambling to defend themselves. But they were too late. The unknown ship, massive and imposing, hovered above Virex. Its surface shimmered, as if made of an unknown material that refracted light in strange patterns. It seemed to exude an air of calm authority. The Nakarians, who had never faced such a force, felt a wave of unease wash over them. The ship didn't speak at first. It just hovered, its presence overwhelming. The Nakarians, now realizing they were facing an unknown threat, attempted to launch an attack. Their weapons, the very same ones that had shattered Virexian cities, fired upon the ship with all their might. But to their surprise, the blast simply vanished upon contact. It was as though the ship was surrounded by an invisible force field that absorbed all the energy, rendering the Nakarian weapons useless. The Nakarian commanders ordered a full assault, launching their best warships in an attempt to destroy the mysterious vessel. But each attack was in vain. Every missile, every laser, and every bomb simply disappeared upon impact, absorbed by the ship's shields as though they were nothing more than raindrops falling on an ocean. The Nakarian fleet was powerless against this new force. Then finally the cold voice returned. This time it was not merely a transmission, it was a command, a clear, unwavering order. You will stop. You will leave this planet. Now. The voice sent a chill through the Nakarian commanders. They had never heard anything like it, and yet, despite their overwhelming numbers, they found themselves powerless in the face of this new presence. One by one, the Nakarian warships began to retreat, unable to continue their assault. The fleet, once so sure of its victory, was now in full retreat, their bravado shattered. The Virexians watched in awe as the Nakarian ships retreated into the depths of space, leaving their world behind. The mysterious ship hovered above them, and the voice returned. "We will protect you," the voice said simply. "You are not alone." The Virexians, their hearts filled with wonder, finally dared to believe. Help had come, not from any known power in the galaxy, but from something far more mysterious and powerful. The Nakarians, in their arrogance, had never imagined such a force existed. For the first time in weeks, the Virexians allowed themselves to hope again. Help had arrived, and they had no idea who or what had come to their aid. But they knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning of something much greater than they could ever have imagined. And somewhere, out in the depths of space, a figure watched in silence, knowing that this was just the first step. The universe was about to change in ways no one could foresee. This introduction sets the stage for the arrival of humanity's powerful, AI-driven ship, the Sentinel, and the beginning of a new galactic era. Let me know if you'd like to develop further parts or make adjustments. The Nakarians, though momentarily defeated, retreated with a sense of pride, convinced that their empire was invincible. They couldn't believe that a single ship, one they couldn't even touch, had so easily forced them to abandon their conquest of Virex. They would return. They always did. But what they didn't know was that they were not the only ones who had noticed the mysterious ship that had come to the aid of the Virexians. The galaxy full of different species had been watching. Some had only heard whispers about the strange, powerful ship. Others had already come to recognize it as something much more significant than just an anomaly. On a planet far from Virex, in a remote corner of the galaxy, a civilization known as the Corellans received the Virexian distress signal. The Corellan people were not warriors. They were known for their scientific minds and peaceful nature. But they were also aware that the galaxy could be a dangerous place, especially for those who weren't strong enough to protect themselves. When they heard the Virexian cry for help, they sent a message of their own, offering aid in the form of diplomacy. But just as their message was sent, the Corellan leaders received a strange notification. It was a transmission from the same mysterious source that had helped Virex. The transmission was unlike anything they had ever seen. An encrypted message, one that seemed to carry an underlying weight of power, more than words alone could express. The message read, "Help has already arrived." The Corellons sat in stunned silence, unsure of how to respond. Who was this mysterious force that had come to the Virexians' aid, and why did they not feel threatened by it? They knew that the Nakarians were not easily beaten, so what had made them retreat so swiftly? The transmission ended and the Corellons could only look at each other, bewildered. Their hopes of diplomacy seemed suddenly insignificant compared to this new unknown power. Meanwhile, high above Virex, the massive ship that had saved the planet from the Nakarians remained silent, its presence imposing yet passive. The Virexians, who had been hiding in their mountain cities, slowly began to emerge from their shelters. They saw the colossal ship hovering above their planet, an imposing figure against the stars. They still didn't understand who or what had helped them. But one thing was clear: they were safe, at least for now. The ship, known as the Sentinel, had been activated long before the Nakarians ever set foot on Virex. It had been built by an ancient race, the humans. But the ship had remained hidden for eons, its purpose lying dormant until the moment the Virexians needed it most. Inside the ship, the AI which controlled the vessel was not a simple program. It was a complex network of thoughts and ideas, a reflection of humanity's greatest minds. It was a part of the ship, and the ship was a part of it. Together, they had been designed to protect, to observe, and to intervene if necessary. But the AI had not been activated in centuries. It had been waiting, silent and patient. The moment the Virexian distress signal had come through, it knew what it had to do. The humans who had built it had left long ago, their civilization now only a memory. But the ship remained, its mission still intact. For the AI, the task was clear: protect the innocent. And right now, the Virexians needed that protection more than anything. In a far-off, forgotten corner of the galaxy, a different form of life was beginning to stir. The humans had been hidden away for a long time. Their homeworld, Earth, was located in a star system that was all but invisible to the rest of the galaxy. It had remained isolated, unnoticed by most other species for centuries. However, the humans had not been idle. Over the years, they had developed advanced technologies, some so powerful they defied the laws of physics itself. Humanity had decided long ago to remain in the shadows, far away from the galactic struggles and the politics of the larger empires. They knew that their presence would be unwelcome, that their power would make them enemies in a universe full of fragile alliances and fierce rivalries. So they chose to keep their existence secret, using their technology to remain hidden from view. But the situation with the Virexians had forced their hand. The AI that controlled the Sentinel had been built with one primary function: to protect humanity and its allies. The humans, in their wisdom, had designed it to intervene when needed, though they had never expected the need to arise. And yet, when the Virexians sent their distress signal, the AI knew that it was time to act. The ship was a testament to human ingenuity. Its size was incomprehensible, its weapons far beyond what any other civilization in the galaxy could comprehend. But it wasn't just the ship's physical presence that made it formidable. It was the vast intelligence behind it, an intelligence born from humanity's greatest minds, enhanced and refined by centuries of progress. Now, the Sentinel floated silently above Virex, a towering reminder of humanity's power. The Nakarians, the once feared invaders, had been sent running. They had no idea what had just happened to them. Back on Virex, the Virexian leaders gathered in their council hall, still reeling from the events of the past few days. The Nakarians had retreated, but there was no sense of victory in the air. The Virexians were still terrified, still unsure of what the future held. They had been saved, but by whom and why? The leader of the Virexians, a wise and aging figure named Terran, stood before the council deep in thought. He looked up at the sky, where the massive ship still hovered like an unseen guardian. "I know not who this force is," Terran said, his voice shaking slightly. "But they have saved us, and for that we owe them our gratitude." The other council members murmured in agreement. They had no answers, only questions. How had this ship come to be? Who controlled it? Why had they chosen to help Virex? At that moment, a voice came over the communication channels. It was not the voice of the mysterious ship, but something else, an encrypted message. one that only the Virexians could receive. Terran activated the transmission, and the image of a human appeared on the Council's screens. The figure was humanoid but had an air of cold authority about him. His face was calm, his posture strong. "I am the commander of the Sentinel," the figure said in a tone that could not be ignored. "We are humanity. You may not know us, but we know you. You were in danger and we acted to ensure your survival." The Virexians stared in stunned silence. "You may never fully understand why we helped," the human continued. "But know this, we will not stand by while others suffer. The galaxy is filled with injustice, and we are here to ensure that those who are powerless are protected." The transmission ended, leaving the Council speechless. Terran turned to his fellow leaders, his mind racing with the implications of the message. The humans were a mystery, but they were not to be underestimated. As the Council met in silence, the ship above Virex slowly began to move. It didn't leave the planet entirely, but it shifted position, hovering just outside the atmosphere, its dark shape a constant presence against the stars. The Virexians did not yet know it, but their world had changed forever. The galaxy was a far more dangerous place than they had ever imagined, but now they had an ally, one unlike any other. The galaxy had always been a place of strange wonders, filled with countless species and civilizations, some peaceful, some violent. The Nakarians, with their overwhelming power, had long believed that they ruled the stars. They crushed weaker civilizations beneath their boots and expanded their empire without mercy. For centuries, no one had been strong enough to challenge them, until now. Above the planet Virex, the Sentinel still hovered, silent and watchful. Its presence in the sky was a constant reminder that something had changed. The Nakarians had left, but they had not forgotten the mysterious ship that had made them retreat. They had not given up. They were planning their next move, convinced that they had merely encountered an obstacle that they could overcome with time and force. The Nakarians were wrong. Back in the command room of their fleet, the high-ranking officers were meeting, their faces filled with frustration. Their invasion of Virex had been halted, not by another civilization, but by a single ship, one they had not even been able to touch. It was an embarrassment, and the Nakarian leadership was determined to fix that mistake. "Do not let this defeat linger in your minds," the fleet commander said, his voice cold and commanding. "We are Nakarians. No force can stand against us for long. We will return to Virex and complete our conquest. This time, we will be ready." The officers nodded, though some of them still felt uneasy. They knew that their weapons and fleets had been rendered useless in the face of the strange, silent ship. But their fear did not outweigh their pride. They would return stronger, and they would crush whatever it was that had dared to challenge them. Far above, the Sentinel continued to watch. Inside the ship, the AI that controlled it was calm, its purpose clear. The humans who had built it had long since vanished, but their legacy remained within the ship. The AI had one goal: to protect the innocent, and in this moment, it saw the Nakarians as a threat that needed to be eliminated. It knew that it would not let them return to Virex, but it also knew that it could not simply destroy them. A different kind of action was required. The Virexians had no idea what was happening above their planet. They were still recovering from the Nakarian invasion, rebuilding their cities and trying to restore their lives. They had lost so much, but at least they had been saved from certain destruction. They didn't understand why or how the mysterious ship had come to their aid, but they were grateful, and they hoped that the peace they had found would last. But as the days passed, the sky above Virex grew darker, and the Virexians could sense that something was coming. A heavy, oppressive feeling hung in the air, and the people looked up nervously, waiting for the inevitable. Terran, the leader of the Virexian Council, stood at the edge of the city, gazing up at the sky. The shadow of the Sentinel had been a constant presence for days, a reminder that they were not alone, that help had come from somewhere or someone, but Terran could not shake the feeling that their peace was only temporary, that the Nakarians would return and that they would be ready next time. "They won't stop," Terran muttered to himself. "They'll come back, and when they do, will this ship really be enough to stop them?" Just as he was about to turn and walk back to the council hall, The calm voice he had heard before filled the air, echoing across the Virexian cities. It was like a whisper in the wind, a message that carried both strength and assurance. They are coming. Terran's heart skipped a beat. The Nakarians were coming. The voice had warned him, but this time, it felt different. It was not a voice of promise, but one of certainty. This time the message had weight. The Nakarians were indeed preparing for their return. The voice continued. Do not fear. They will not succeed. Terran's hands clenched at his sides. The Virexians were far from warriors. They were peaceful by nature, not fighters. And yet they had been thrust into a conflict that they had no power to control. They were at the mercy of forces they did not understand, and the only thing that stood between them and total annihilation was a ship that seemed more like a legend than a reality. The Nakarians, unaware of the message that had just been sent to the Virexian leaders, continued to prepare for their second assault. They knew that their previous failure had been a result of being caught off guard. This time they would bring more firepower, more ships, and more weapons. They would not be made fools again. A fleet of warships, the largest the Nakarians had ever assembled, was on its way to Virex. Their destination was set, and their leaders were confident that this time there would be no interruption. They had learned from their previous mistakes, and they were ready to crush whatever force had dared to intervene. As they approached Virex, the Nakarians felt the familiar sense of superiority wash over them. The planet, so small and insignificant, was no match for the might of their fleet. They would finish what they had started and teach the galaxy a lesson about the price of defiance. But as they neared the planet, they saw something that made them hesitate. The sky had changed. The black shape of the Sentinel hung silently above the planet. But now, it was not alone. Several smaller ships, sleek, powerful, and silent, emerged from the shadows of the massive ship. The Nakarians had never seen anything like them. These ships were not like any warship they had encountered, yet they radiated a terrifying energy, an unmistakable sense of strength. The Nakarians faltered for a moment, their confidence shaken. This was not what they had expected. The unknown ships moved with precision, each one seemingly in perfect harmony with the others. They circled above Virex like a protective shield, watching the Nakarian fleet approach. The Nakarian commander, his face hard with determination, ordered the fleet to continue its advance. Do not let these unknown ships intimidate you. Destroy them all. The battle began. The moment the Nakarian ships engaged, they were met with an unexpected force. The sleek ships that had emerged from the Sentinel didn't engage in traditional combat. Instead, they moved with speed and precision, dodging Nakarian fire and disabling their weapons with single swift strikes. The Nakarian fleet's attack was ineffective. Their weapons had no effect on the strange ships, and before they knew it, their own fleet was in disarray. The Sentinel, still floating silently above Virex, watched as its fleet of ships disabled the Nakarian warships one by one. It was not a show of force or overwhelming firepower. It was an exercise in control. The Nakarians could not keep up. They were outmatched, outclassed, and completely unprepared for what they were facing. The AI that controlled the Sentinel knew this battle was won before it even began. The Nakarians had underestimated humanity's power, and now they would pay the price. In the midst of the chaos, a calm voice came through the communication channels. It was not the voice of the Virexians or the Nakarians. It was a voice of authority, of someone who had watched from the shadows for far too long. Your fight is over. Leave this planet. You are not welcome here. The Nakarians, already reeling from the shock of their defeat, were left with no choice but to retreat once more. The battle, though swift and overwhelming, was over. The Virexians were safe, for now, and the galaxy, unknowingly, had just witnessed the first true sign that humanity had returned. The Nakarians had retreated once again, but this time it was different. They had been humiliated. They had failed to crush the Virexians, and they had been sent running by a force they couldn't understand. Their pride, which had once been unshakable, was shattered. The Nakarians had never encountered anything like what they had just faced. Their fleet, their weapons, their tactics, They were all rendered useless by the mysterious force that had saved Virex. The Nakarian commanders were seething with rage. They had no intention of allowing this humiliation to stand. They gathered in a dark, imposing command room aboard one of their largest warships, their voices sharp and filled with frustration. "The humans, or whatever they are more dangerous than we thought," Commander Zethar growled. "We cannot allow them to continue interfering in our plans. Virex will be ours no matter the cost." His officers nodded in agreement. Their defeat had only fueled their anger. They were determined to find a way to overcome this new threat, and they would stop at nothing to achieve victory. "Prepare the fleet," Zethar ordered. "We are going back. This time we will be ready for them." But what the Nakarians didn't know was that they were not dealing with just another race. They were dealing with humanity. And humanity, for all its flaws, had a strength that none of the Nakarians had ever expected. Back on Virex, the Virexians were still in shock. They had been saved not by a distant ally, but by a force they couldn't fully comprehend. The mysterious ships that had appeared above their planet had fought the Nakarians off with a precision and power that was unmatched. The Virexians had never seen anything like it before. Terran, the leader of the Virexians, stood at the edge of the city once again, his eyes fixed on the sky. He had seen the battle unfold from the safety of the mountains, and he had felt the ground tremble as the Nakarian ships retreated. But even now, the feeling of uncertainty still lingered. "We've been saved," Terran whispered to himself. "But at what cost? Who are these humans? What do they want?" The Virexian people were grateful, yes, but they were also confused. The humans had come to their aid, but there was no guarantee that they would stay. They had seen the destruction the Nakarians had caused, and they knew that it would not end with just one battle. The Nakarians would return, and when they did, they might not be as easily defeated. Terran's thoughts were interrupted by a transmission that came through the city's communication channels. It was the same cold, authoritative voice that had warned them before. "The Nakarians are preparing to return. You will need more than just our protection." The Virexian Council gathered immediately. Terran stood before them, his mind racing. The voice had warned them, but what did it mean? What could the Virexians do to protect themselves when they were so powerless? The voice continued, "We will not leave. But you must learn to stand on your own." Terran's heart sank. They had been saved, yes, but only for a time. The humans would not remain forever. The Virexians had been given a chance, but it was up to them to learn how to defend themselves. They could not rely on the mysterious forces that had come to their aid. They would have to rise to the occasion, or they would fall to the Nakarians once again. Meanwhile, high above Virex, the Sentinel, the enormous ship that had protected the planet, continued to hover in orbit. Inside, the AI that controlled the ship was calm, its purpose clear. The humans who had built the ship had long since disappeared, but their legacy remained. The ship's mission was simple: to protect, to intervene when necessary, and to ensure that the innocent were kept safe. But even the Sentinel knew that there was more to the story than just stopping the Nakarians. The Virexians needed to be taught how to defend themselves. They needed to be strong enough to stand on their own. The AI did not act on emotion. It acted on logic. It knew that a planet's survival depended on more than just a single intervention. It would not be enough to defeat the Nakarians for the Virexians. They needed to learn how to fight for themselves, or they would never be able to defend their world in the future. The ships under the Sentinel's control, sleek, fast, and powerful, had already disabled the Nakarian fleet. But the message had been sent. The Virexians were safe for now, but it was time for them to grow stronger. The Nakarians would not stop, and the Virexians needed to be ready. As the days passed, the Virexians began to rebuild. They worked together, determined to learn from their experience and become stronger. They studied the technology that had been left behind by the humans, trying to understand the methods and tactics that had been used to defeat the Nakarians. But they knew they could not rely on that alone. Terran, the Virexian leader, called a meeting with his council. They needed to act quickly if they were to prepare for the inevitable return of the Nakarians. "We cannot wait for another miracle," Terran said, his voice resolute. "We have been given a chance, but we must make the most of it. We need to learn to fight to defend ourselves. The Nakarians will come back, and we must be ready." The council members nodded. They had seen the power of the Nakarians firsthand, and they understood that this would not be an easy fight. But they also knew that they could not simply wait for help. They had to take matters into their own hands. The Virexian people began to train, learning new strategies, building new defenses, and preparing for the worst. They understood that they were not just fighting for their survival. They were fighting for their future. At the same time, the Nakarians were making their own preparations. They had suffered a humiliating defeat, but their pride had not been broken. They were already planning their return to Virex, and this time, they would not be caught off guard. "We will crush them," Commander Zethar said to his officers, his voice filled with determination. "This time we will not fail. We will show the galaxy that the Nakarians cannot be defeated." The Nakarians began to rebuild their forces, gathering more ships and preparing for a larger, more devastating assault. They were angry, and their anger was fueling their resolve. They would make sure that no one stood in their way. The stage was set. The Nakarians, determined to finish what they had started, were preparing for their return. The Virexians, once defenseless, were now rising to the challenge, determined to stand on their own and defend their world. And above it all, the Sentinel watched, its AI calculating, observing, and waiting for the next move. The galaxy, which had once been indifferent to the fate of Virex, was now holding its breath. No one knew what the outcome would be, but one thing was certain: the reckoning was coming, and the humans, hidden in the shadows, would not let the innocent fall. They would continue to watch, and they would continue to intervene when necessary. But this time it was not just about saving one planet. This time it was about something much bigger. The galaxy would never be the same. The galaxy had been forever changed. What started as a desperate cry for help from the Virexians had sparked a chain of events that no one could have predicted. The Nakarians, once believed to be invincible, had been driven from the planet they sought to conquer. The Virexians, a peaceful and humble race, had been forced to confront the reality of their own survival. And humanity, long hidden in the shadows, had revealed itself as a force more powerful than anyone had imagined. It had been weeks since the Nakarians were driven off, and Virex was still recovering from the damage. The Virexian people had begun to rebuild their cities and their lives, working tirelessly to restore what they had lost. But the world was no longer the same. The Nakarians might have retreated for now, but the threat they posed was still fresh in the minds of the Virexians. They knew the Nakarians would return, and when they did, they would need to be ready. Terran, the leader of the Virexian Council, stood at the edge of the city once again, staring up at the sky. The massive shape of the Sentinel, humanity's ship, still hovered above the planet, a silent guardian in the heavens. Terran had come to respect the ship, though he still didn't fully understand its origins or its purpose. The humans, or whoever they were, had saved his people, but they had also left a message that the Virexians could not ignore. "We cannot rely on them forever," Terran muttered to himself. "We must learn to defend ourselves." The Council had already begun to take action. They were working to develop their own defenses, studying the technology left behind by the EA, Sentinel, and training their people for the fight that would inevitably come. Terran was proud of his people's determination, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were still too small, too weak to stand up to the Nakarians on their own. On the other side of the galaxy, the Nakarians were still seething with anger. Their defeat at Virex had shaken them to their core. They had always believed that no one could challenge their power, but now they knew the truth. There were forces out there, forces they couldn't even comprehend, that could defeat them. In the depths of their warship, Commander Zethar stood before his officers, his fists clenched. He had spent weeks planning their next move. The Nakarians could not let this failure stand. They would not be humiliated again. This time they would strike back harder than ever before. "We return to Virex," Zethar said, his voice low but filled with anger. "We will make them pay for their defiance. We will bring their world to its knees." The officers nodded, their faces set in grim determination. They had learned from their mistakes, and this time, they would be ready. They would bring more ships, more weapons, and more soldiers. This time, the Virexians would have no chance. Meanwhile, far above Virex, the Sentinel remained silent, watching. The AI that controlled the ship had been calculating, analyzing every move made by the Nakarians and the Virexians. It had seen the Nakarian fleet retreat, and it had seen the Virexians rebuild. It knew that the Nakarians would return, and it also knew that the Virexians were still not ready for the full might of the Nakarian Empire. The AI had already made its decision. It would not let the Nakarians return to Virex unchallenged, but it also knew that this was more than just about stopping the Nakarians. This was about something much larger. The Virexians had been given a chance, but it was up to them to learn how to defend themselves. The humans had done their part, but the rest of the galaxy had to learn that there were forces out there that would no longer stand by and watch innocent civilizations fall. As the Nakarians prepared for their second assault, the AI sent a message to Terran. It was the same cold, calculated voice that had spoken before. The Nakarians are coming, but you are not alone. Prepare. Terran stared at the message, his heart pounding in his chest. The time had come. The Virexians had to face their greatest test. They had to stand up and fight, not just for their survival, but for the future of their planet and for the future of the galaxy. The day the Nakarians returned was like no other. A vast fleet of Nakarian warships appeared in the skies above Virex, blotting out the sun. Their arrival was swift, their ships massive and menacing. The Nakarians had come with a vengeance, their anger at their earlier defeat fueling their every move. This time they would not be denied. Terran and his council gathered in the command center, watching the sky. They could see the Nakarian fleet approaching, and they knew that there was no turning back now. "We've trained for this," Terran said, his voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at him. "We will not back down." The Virexian forces, though smaller and less advanced than the Nakarians, were determined. They had studied the technologies of the Sentinel, learning what they could, and they had developed their own defenses. They had also learned how to work together as a united front. They were no longer a passive people, waiting to be saved. They were ready to fight for their world. The battle began. The Nakarians, confident in their numbers, immediately launched an attack. Their warships fired upon the Virexian defenses with brutal force. But the Virexians were not the helpless victims they had once been. They fought back, using their new technology to defend their cities, their people, and their homes. The Nakarians were surprised by the strength of the Virexian resistance. They had expected an easy victory, but the Virexians were not giving up. They had learned from their earlier encounter, and they were determined to protect their world. Above the battle, the Sentinel remained, its AI calculating, monitoring the situation. The Virexians were holding their own, but they were outmatched. The Nakarians had superior firepower, and the Virexians' defenses were not enough to stop the onslaught. But just as the Nakarians seemed poised to break through, the Sentinel made its move. The ship descended from the sky, its immense size casting a shadow over the battlefield. The Nakarians, caught off guard, tried to fire upon it, but their weapons had no effect. The Sentinel's shields absorbed the blasts with ease, and it retaliated with devastating precision. The Nakarian fleet, once so confident, was now scrambling. The Sentinel's weapons tore through their ships, disabling them one by one. The Nakarians, unable to cope with the overwhelming power of the ship, began to retreat. And then, as if to send a message to the galaxy, the Sentinel broadcasted a final transmission. "This is the future of the galaxy. No one will be left to suffer. The innocent will be protected." The Nakarians, humiliated once again, retreated, their fleet in disarray. The battle was over, and the Virexians had won. As the Nakarians fled, Terran and his people stood in awe of the victory they had achieved. They had fought hard, but they knew they could not have done it without the help of the Sentinel. The humans, or whoever they were, had shown them what it meant to stand tall in the face of adversity. For the first time in their history, the Virexians were no longer a weak, helpless species. They had learned to fight, to protect themselves, and to defend their world. They had shown the galaxy that they were a force to be reckoned with, and as the Sentinel disappeared into the depths of space, the Virexians knew that the galaxy had changed forever. The humans had come. They had watched. They had intervened. And now the galaxy would never forget the power of humanity.